I wanted to make a video to talk about children's books, the children's books that I wrote that haven't been published, that are children's stories for picture books. Initially I wanted to write children's picture book texts and illustrate them, and I started doing that in my early 20s and then stopped doing it while I was ill and then continued after I got over the illness and a little bit during the illness. And the problem I found was firstly cutting my children's stories down sufficiently. I sent them off to an editor who gave me quite a lot of feedback, and every time the stories were too long, and it was quite good discipline actually, cutting my stories down. I think I got one story down to 60 words. That was the story Eclipse, or as it was initially titled, The Night the Moon Went Out. Then the second problem was illustrating the stories, because I was working from photographs of real children and real animals, and it was very, very difficult getting candid photographs of children that married up with the content of my words. And I spent many a long, and in retrospect quite funny, day with children of friends and children in the family. And in the end I kind of gave up. And then just as I gave up, that kind of realistic picture book went out of fashion altogether, and the more crazy, quirky type of picture book that didn't really have realistic illustrations took off. But I still had at least nine children's book stories, just the texts, and I wondered how I could illustrate them in a different way. And then one day I had the idea of using some of the little people, which I'd already made by this point, and photographing them. And I realised that I could kind of tweak my stories and change them a little bit, and they would actually work, at least I thought, really well with the little people. And the only thing left to do then was to make the sets. It was quite a few years before I got round to making the houses and sets, or having the houses made, the sets. And that largely was to do with not being able to afford to have the houses made, because I don't know how to make dolls' houses, although I did make a house in a tree and a house in a burrow, and kind of more natural forms. The way the idea came to me of using my little miniature people to illustrate my children's stories was that one day I was looking at all the different characters of the little people. Often they were from nursery rhymes, for instance Bo Peep or Wee Willie Winkie, or well-known characters like Father Christmas. And I was thinking how brilliant it would be to animate them, and then was thinking just to photograph them in sets, you know, with houses and landscape. And then I thought, how could I join them all together in a story? And so the first picture book story involving the little people was called Where's My Story, in which I chose Little Pixie, which I mentioned in the video about the little people, I chose him to be the protagonist, and he walked through a world in which everyone else had a story attached to them, for instance a nursery rhyme or a fairy tale, but he had no story at all, and he was sad because of it, and he was looking for his story. It turns out that he's actually walking through his own story, and at the end we see the hand of the artist, which is my hand, and a door in a paper wall opens, or a door in the page opens, and then all the other characters he's met throughout the story surprise him with this wonderful present, the very book you're holding, or I imagine the child holding, with him on the cover. So I was so excited by this idea of using the little people for a story that I began to think maybe I could use the little people to illustrate the other children's books I'd written, which were initially meant to be illustrated with real children in a very realistic way. So I'd like to show you the little mock-up books I made of the picture books today, and then I don't have the illustrations in any form except digitally online, but in fact that might be the best, because the light from the screen of the laptop kind of gives them a luminosity, and hopefully that will translate into the camera. So first of all, I made lots of tiny, well, tiny mock-up books which my agent suggested in order to present them to publishers, for them to have a physical copy to see how the picture books read. This is quite a common thing in the picture book world apparently, whereas it doesn't really matter how a novel handles, or for most novels anyway, the look of the text on the page. For picture books it's crucially important, so often authors and illustrators will collab to make a little mock-up book. These mock-up books actually took me about 6 to 9 months to make, because I had at that point no photoshopping skills, and it was incredibly expensive as well. I used to visit Snappy Snaps virtually every day, and inch by inch, picture by picture, margin by margin, I got these little books the size I wanted, and got the illustrations and handwritten text all working together. The result is actually pretty basic and pretty crude, but it was the best I could do at the time. So here are the little books. I think there are 9 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. And I'll take them over to the desk and show you them. These are some of the spare illustrations from them that I didn't need to make the mock picture books anymore. This one is from the second story featuring Little Pixie. I guess you can't see very well there. It'll be easier to show you the illustrations on a computer. That's from a story called Greta the Great. And then I've got some here from a story called Little Old Lady Pie, and then some more from a story called Grandma's Piano, and then a story called Mr. Trushenko the Toy Maker, Little Old Lady Pie again, Grandma's Piano, Greta the Great, The Day the Lights Went Out, Grandma's Piano, and the second Little Pixie story again. And there's some more here. This is from the first Little Pixie story called Where's My Story. This is one of the pictures at the end. This is also from Where's My Story. In fact, I think all of these are from Where's My Story. Oh no, that's the second Little Pixie story. Okay, so I'll get on and show you the little books. So here are the 9 children's picture book mock-ups. I think the first story I had the idea for was, let me think. Well, the first story I had the idea for featuring the little people as the illustrations was this story called Where's My Story. But the first story, let me think. I think, I think it may have been this one, which is the story I think I'm most proud of, and is also the shortest story. Originally it was titled Eclipse. A little boy who's afraid of the dark. Sorry about that kind of chiseling noise. I think there's builders working beneath this flat. It's about a little boy who's afraid of the dark, and one night his granddad takes him to see an eclipse of the moon. And at the point where the land is completely eaten up by darkness, the little boy experiences a kind of deathly fear, both of losing his granddad, of being alone, and being swallowed up by darkness, which is essentially death. And I won't tell you what happens. In fact, nothing very much happens, but there's a kind of shift in the little boy. And I'll take you through it when I do that, when I kind of film the story. As you can see, these little mock-ups are very homely. I stuck kind of, what's it called? The stuff you put on exercise books when you're in school, and it bubbled and made a mess. I took all of the photos myself of the models in the houses that I had made, and in some of the houses and homes I made myself, or in the landscapes. I chose the fonts carefully for each story. I know you can't see that well here. In this case, and I mean, I wrote the letters as well. It's not like I used a computer font. In this case, I wanted a chalk-like effect, as if it was chalk on blackboard. And I think I actually I used chalk on a black piece of card to get the different colour whites, moonlight whites, on the dark background, and then photoshopped it over the top of the cover photograph. Inside, I decided to have as end paper the little boy's toy monkey. This is actually a very tiny crocheted monkey I found on a keyring, and he was the perfect size for a 1/12 scale child's toy. And here he is covering his eyes. Might not be very obvious because the monkey is kind of afraid of the dark as well. And then at the end, he's smiley. I had to Photoshop a smile on the monkey because his face was blank. He's smiley, not covering his eyes anymore. Then we open up the book and we have my little website, a little bit of fake copyright, and then we have the title page, again with the fonts I chose. As you can see, I was inspired by the kind of very classical type of picture books that were popular sort of early to mid-90s, illustrated very beautifully often by Christine Birmingham or P.J. Lynch. I think P.J. Lynch is the name. And of course, as I said in the previous video, I'd given up on illustrating them myself. But I wanted to have very atmospheric pictures and realistic pictures in this picture book, although the style in some of the other picture books is quite different. Then the first spread is the little boy in his bedroom, which is a room in the doll's house I had made. And these are photographs I took having no knowledge of photography or lighting at all. I had a lamp outside the window and played around with different filters. I mean, by filters I mean pieces of paper, cellophane, fabric, to get a kind of white moon-like effect and different colour bulbs. And overall, I was really delighted in the end with the effects I got, and it was so wonderful being able to control the illustrations completely, because although all of these picture books were turned down as not being saleable, if they had been published, I would have had to work with an illustrator and kind of go along with their interpretation of the story. And I'm not actually very good at collaborating with people because I have a very definite idea of how I want my work to look. This bedroom, he has his kind of chart on the wall, some toys, robot on the wall, a toy aeroplane. The resolution of these photographs, unfortunately, is pretty bad, so that's why it will be best to show you them all digitally by loading photographs together to make a video, because I don't know whether it was Snappy Snaps printing or whether I'd done something in the process of photoshopping them, but the end result is very, very fuzzy, as you can see, and was really, really disappointing, especially when I managed to make light effects, conjure such subtle light effects, to have lost a lot of it. For instance, in the original photo you can still make out the bed and all of the furniture and details in this corner of the room, but you can't in the end result. And by the way, I just sewed these little books together. One of the biggest challenges, believe it or not, was working out the double sides of each sheet. So for a 24-page picture book, there are, if I remember rightly, 1, 2, 3 mini books, and so that are stitched together. So you have the first mini book, and on the outer sheet of paper you have this and this. So these two form the outer image on a very long sheet of paper, and then this is the inner image, and that's the other part of the inner image, that bit of text there. So I know this might seem basic to the more, I don't want to say mathematically minded of you, but the more kind of, I don't know, whatever part of your brain you need to work this out. Mine found it really challenging, and I wasted so many hours and so much time and money in snappy snaps getting the wrong combinations. In any case, I got better obviously as I went along. So I'll just briefly show you the rest of the book, but I'll leave the telling of the story to the digital, shall we call it, edition. I wanted a spread where there weren't any words and there was silence when they gazed at the moon, and then another silent spread as they walked through the garden and up the hill to the top of the hill to see the eclipse. This was actually an image I found online, and I photoshopped it. It was a daylit image of countryside, but I photoshopped it, and I was so pleased with the result because, of course, even if I'd had an air hanger to make my set, I still would not have been able to make a set big enough to photograph, because in the 1/12 scale is actually quite big. As you've seen, my little people are about, well, the adults are 6 inches high, so if you imagine a house is, you know, probably up to an adult's shoulders. And so a countryside this vast, I don't know how many miles that would have taken of space. In any case, I managed to make it look moonlit, and then I superimposed an image of a moon, and then I photoshopped the image to make it look a little bit darker, although the shadow is not really in the right place, and I photoshopped a black disc over the moon and did it a little bit, accentuated both a little bit more and a little bit more. And I was really relieved and pleased that I managed to get photographs of the little people and houses in semi-darkness that actually came out at all. I think that was due to the fact, actually I don't know how that happened, but and then I was able to put a blue tinge later in Photoshop on them. And then the story ends more or less happily. I love this picture. Again, you'll see it much better as a digital photograph, but I really love this photo. And my mum, bless her, I was looking for an interesting, kind of interestingly shaped tree to extrude across my moon. My moon was actually a lamp shining through a pane of glass and some chalk paper with a chalk pattern drawn on it, if I remember rightly. By the way, we got through a couple of bulbs and 2 whole sheets of glass because the lamp got so hot with the amount of time I was photographing. It just kind of splintered the grass. So my mum found this lovely pine. I'm not sure what kind of pine it is, but she told me she leant over a bridge to get this bit of branch. We were terrors roaming around the countryside, snipping bits of foliage here and there for these stories. And then there's another wordless spread at the end with Grandad carrying the little boy home. So that's the night the moon went out. It was originally called Eclipse, and I still kind of like that word, but the editor that I worked with these stories on said the night the moon went out was more kind of child-friendly and more intriguing, and I see her point. So that's the first story. Then I think one of the other earliest stories I had was, oh yes, definitely this one, the scrapwork field. I've been enchanted by the idea of a field both owning a field and a story about a field for many, many years. I'm not sure where it first inched into my consciousness, but this story is about a little girl who's staying with her friend Sylvie in the countryside, and it opens with her having to go home, and she's sad because the summer has been so lovely, but also because she and Sylvie have a special place, which is this field that they've had so many fun times in together. And so Sylvie thinks up an ingenious idea to make her not feel so sad that she has to go home, and thinks up a present the little girl can take home with her and keep a part of the holiday and the field with her for always, or at least until next summer when she sees Sylvie again. This cover, oh, I should have shown you the spine on the other book. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, I just about managed to get my font on the spine. No, you can't see. Anyway, this one you can see a little bit better. So it says here, Grace McLean. I honestly, I don't know how people manage to like their videos. Maybe it's because I'm using an iPhone, but I'm really struggling. And the scrapbook field, you can see better on the front. It's the same font. An awful lot of work went into making the letters in this book. Each of these letters was made with fabric, or felt, or sewn, or embroidered, and photographed. And I had a whole alphabet because the scrapbook field Sylvie makes for Meg is made from pieces of fabric, etc. I decided to make the title with fabric as well. And there's another piece of denim fabric here as a kind of border to the cover. And this is Sylvie. And this is actually Meg Duckworth, who originally I made as the star of the Duckworth family and those stories that I wanted to illustrate and animate, which I mentioned in another video. But here she's just Meg in this story. And again, originally I envisaged this book as being illustrated in a completely realistic way. So we have our end paper, which is a kind of lattice work floral affair, and this is kind of reminiscent of Sylvie's cottage and the flowers from the field. Then we have a little piece of the actual fabric field Sylvie made, which is a kite for Meg, and photoshopped around it are stitches that I sewed on a piece of white cotton. And then we have the same font title and a little picture of Sylvie's cottage. This was one of the houses I had made quite a few years after I'd written the story, when I could afford it, when I'd sold the land of decoration, and I really, really do love this house so much. My mum and I made the garden, fake grass, branches for apple trees, and a real stone wall. I'll go into how we made everything later on, but it really did look enchanting. And there we have a little bit of a closer shot of the house, garden, gate, we bought the gate, wall, little tiny baby ferns, we used real ferns as ferns, and the gravel path. And here's Meg looking sad. Each beginning letter is fabric, and oh, sorry, there's a little motif in the corner of the pages, usually a sewn or embroidered flower, in keeping with the field theme. Unfortunately, because of the way I had to guillotine the book, sometimes these little details are chopped off, sometimes even whole words are chopped off. I don't know how I managed to mess up the measurements so far, but my forte is not in the technical side, which is a great shame. So there we have the interior of Sylvie's cottage. And then we have another spread where Meg gets angry that she has to go home and runs to the bottom of the garden. And then you can see how the font, the type was cut off and bits of the letters. Here Meg is remembering the nice things they've done on holiday. And some more nice things. Again, a bit is missing from the page. More fabric letters. And then we have 3 little photographs, which are photographs of a real field that was not far from the thatched cottage in the New Forest, and were part of the illustrations I made, the photographs I took when I was still trying to illustrate this photo realistically. I'm not sure why this is so dark. I'm trying to make it brighter. Let me... Okay, so that's a lot better. Yeah, so these were photographs I took of a real field. Oh, actually, of a lane leading to a field. My mum and I spent many, many weeks searching for the perfect field. We never really found one, so the photographs I took were a conglomeration of a few different fields. But this lane was particularly lovely. And then this is another photograph, and imposed on it are some fabric letters. And then we have a double spread of Sylvie and Meg in what is now a model field, not a real field. I was never really sure whether the marriage of photographs of real field and photographs of the model field worked in this story. And then we have the other things Sylvie and Meg did in the field. Then Sylvie finds Meg and says she has an idea. She takes her back to the kitchen, and while Jess... Oh, Jess! I thought she was called Meg. Oh my goodness. Okay, she's actually called Jess. And there we are. I've given the story away. So Sylvie has made a fabric field, which I actually made this scale so the model could hold it up. All very tiny pieces of fabric glued together. Tiny beads, tiny stars, a little owl, a kite, bunny rabbits, picnic blanket, patchwork hills, corn, bulrushes, sun, tent, and of course Sylvie and Meg. And Meg stops feeling sad because she has this precious thing she can take away with her. This fantastic little tin car. I don't know the company's name, but they make... Have a bit more tea. As I was saying, there's a company that does these tin vehicles. They do kind of VW sort of camper van things. They do double-decker buses. They do motorbikes. They do what else do they do? This is the only kind of normal car they do, unfortunately, though. But I managed to get both my little models in because there's nothing in the windows. It's just clear. And it was pretty difficult, but I managed it. I even managed to kind of affix a seatbelt to Jess. I forgot to put a seatbelt on her mum. Anyway, here her mum has arrived to take her away, and Sylvia's waving goodbye. And then we have a close-up, which is not altogether successful, but the best I could do, of Jess spreading out the scrapbook field on her lap and imagining she is with Sylvie again. And then we have a close-up of the two little fabric figures as Jess kind of goes into the world of the field. And then, unfortunately, the letters got cut off again. Sylvie and Jess begin to run. The two model figures run through a real field. Again, I'm not sure how well that worked. And on the back of the book, we have Sylvie's work table with all her scraps of material, scissors, wool, etc. So there's that little book. Then we have a book called Greta the Great. Now, it was a mistake to use red, or mostly red letters on the cover. I can see that now, even though I edged them in white. These were paper letters, not fabric this time, cut out of paper. The font, I don't know what it's called, but it was the closest I could get to what I imagined is a kind of old Norse or Scandinavian type font. That's actually mirrored, a mirror behind that mirror, a G cut in the shape of a mirrored paper. Again, not much of this really comes across, and the photo itself is very low resolution, unfortunately. And on the back we have Greta's bedroom lit by moonlight, which is not very obvious either. The end papers are snow, or what's meant to be snow is, in fact, is just blurry dots in Photoshop on a black background. Then we have the Scandinavian living room in the house lit by oil lamp. In fact, that should be lit if it was lit by oil lamp, but such are the difficulties of scaled down lighting. And the title page and a little photograph of part of Greta's farm where she lives with her mum and dad. There's a bigger photo of it. I'll talk a little bit more about the house I had made and the farm that I made when I do the behind the scenes video. Again, we've got the paper letter to begin each paragraph, and again I've lost some of the text. That's what the pages look like. I'm sure you all know this, but just in case you don't, when making a picture book it's important for each page to look different, so there's a variety of layouts for the reader to engage with. This is actually a China horse I found, the only 1/12 scale horse I could find, and it kind of works. And there's Greta peering into the woodshed, which is very dark. I photoshopped it to make it dark. I can't remember how I actually got the camera inside the shed now. No, I can't remember that at all, because without taking a wall off the shed, I don't know how I'd have done it. Anyway, now we have the snow scene, occasion of the biggest mess I've ever made because I used flour as snow to try and dust all these trees in the background. And actually behind these trees were louvered doors of one of my parents' wardrobes, not this blue sky I photoshopped in. And when I sifted flour over the whole landscape, it floated in through the louvered doors and coated all my dad's jackets and trousers, and it took my mum and I a long time to get rid of it. In fact, I expect they're still finding flour in his stuff now. Most of the snow was cotton wool though, or pipe cleaners along kind of narrow bits, fluffy white pipe cleaners. Then we have some interior shots. By the way, I absolutely love the inside of this little house. I would like to live in a house like this. I love the Scandinavian designs, and I know I've made it a little bit cliched, but it's actually quite hard to find very specific furniture and accessories in 1/12 scale, so I just shopped around and kind of made the best mixture of Scandinavian type things I could. For instance, this tureen, this coffee pot, the wall cupboard, the oil lamp, the clock, and I made the curtains and striped rugs. And here's Greta in her bedroom. There's a close-up of her dad. A close-up of Greta not looking so happy now because she's alone in the dark. Greta was one of the models in which I made about 5 or 6 different heads, each having a different expression. I did the same with Jess in the previous story. I didn't have to do the same with Joe in The Night the Moon Went Out, because his face for some reason lent itself to lots of different expressions, a bit like Little Pixie, which I'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, Greta was one of the... So this is a different head now to her happy face, which is there. She has a little rag doll. By the way, that's Raggedy Ann, one of the tiny models that I spoke about in the video about my first batch of miniatures. And there's an aerial view of the farm and some shots of the snowy night. These 2 animals were made by a very talented American lady. I think her website is called Woolly Tales. And because I did not know how to cover things in feathers and fur, although I could have sculpted the animals, and because I could afford it at that time, I asked her to make these animals for me. And I was so pleased with the result, because they weren't uber realistic, which I didn't want. I wanted them to look a little bit model-like, and that's how it turned out. In this photo here, this was, oh gosh, this was actually a postcard of a snowy scene placed behind the doll's house window. Then we have some smaller shots of Greta tossing and turning and looking not very pleased, and the clock chiming, or not chiming, but different shots of the clock. And then there's another head again with an open mouth and kind of a very surprised, startled look. There's another curly paper letter and the same head looking surprised. Then a big shot of Greta crossing the moonlit bedroom, and another mirror letter, a letter cut out of reflective silver foil, and a close-up of the head, the surprised head. Then Greta passing through her mum and dad's bedroom. I really love the wallpaper in this bedroom. It feels quite Scandinavian to me. I don't know, I mean, it probably isn't, but it was the best 1/12 scale kind of Scandi wallpaper I could find. It's a close-up of mum and dad. Then Greta goes down the hall. Sometimes in photoshopping the photographs to make them look moonlit or dark, it just didn't work. In this case, it's too washed out. Then Greta opens the door to the kitchen, and she's lit by the light from the stove. And inside the kitchen, that's meant to be a bee, by the way, inside the kitchen she finds someone sleeping in a basket by the stove. And it turns out to be, well, I'll leave that for the digital version of the story, but suffice to say here that this little animal was made by the same lady who made the fox and the owl. I'm pretty sure, anyway. I'm pretty sure. And Greta takes care of him, snuggles down beside him, and in the morning, Mum and Dad find her with her new friend. And here's a close-up of Dad swinging her up into his arms. And this beautiful reindeer, stag I mean, was also made by the Woolly Tales lady, I think. I'm not sure, I think it was. And there's the farm in the sunshine, and they're all going to have breakfast together. So that's Greta the Great. Then we have the fourth storybook I'm going to show you is called Mr. Trushenko, the Toy Maker. I've no idea if this is how you spell Trushenko, but I wanted it to have a kind of to have a kind of Middle Eastern, possibly Russian sounding name. And I'd heard the name Trushenko somewhere in the past. This model is actually called the Watchmaker. And again, when I made him, I had no intention of using him in a story. He wasn't made for any particular story. I just want to say one last note about this story and how I chose these particular models for it. The story as it stood was just about a child that's afraid of the dark and overcomes their fear through helping a little animal who seems to be even more afraid of the dark than themselves. And so I cast my eye over my models, and I could only choose out of the children models, and there are a lot more adults than children, so that narrowed it down for a start. Then my eye fell on this little girl, and I'd made her in a kind of to look Scandinavian, and I thought, well, if she lives high up, say in Norway or Sweden or Finland, the days in winter are very short and the nights are very long there, so that would be perfect to heighten a child's fear of the dark. So that's how this whole setting came about, and then I kind of rewrote the story a little bit to take into account the Scandinavian element. So the Watchmaker was always had a miserable face, and this is what initially made me think he could be Mr. Trushenko, who is a very grumpy toy maker. And I had to modify his face during the story when he smiles by putting a little bit more modelling clay around his jowls and cheeks to camouflage the frown and make him smile, but I didn't have to make different heads. And this was a Tudor house that I had made for a different story, and I modified the front of it by placing 2 separate bay windows there and a little stable door, and then I photoshopped the top of the windows to make it look like they joined the overhanging top of the house. And this little set I made with just pebbles and a little marketplace scene and a village green. Then we've got the spine again. It's very wonky and not great. But if these books had ever made their way into the hands of a publisher, it would have given the publisher a rough idea of how the stories went and how the pages were laid out. On the back is a very bad quality photograph, which I actually love the photo, and it's a shame that the printing didn't really do justice to it. It's Mr. Trushenko holding a toy that he's repairing in his workshop, and it's one of the few times where we get a kind of look of tenderness or happiness on his face, which shows he's capable of these emotions. And that little doll is, I think, Christine, the broken china doll I made, which is part of the old-fashioned toys series up in the nursery. I made her when I was about 21 or 22. And of course all these toys, fortunately, are the right size for the 1/12 scale models. They are toy size to the little people. So I was just having a bit of fun with kind of a type, this book belongs to page. I've got my little copyright and website again. And then I have end papers, which in this case are a small empty tin mug. The relevance of this should hopefully become apparent through in the course of the story. So I'm just trying to get the lighting a little bit better. And the end, oh, here at the end I've got also by Grace McLean and the other titles. But yeah, the end page is the tin mug with a daffodil in it, although that might not be obvious, at least not on camera. So we turn the page and we have a shot of Mr. Trushenko's workshop where he fixes toys and makes them. He's got sawdust on the floor. I really love this little room as well. I think it was just an outhouse built on the Tudor house and not meant to be a workshop, but it turned itself into that quite handily. And we've got various toys from the Up in the Nursery range that I put on the shelves. Some really were broken. You can't really see here, but there are parts of Humpty Dumpty on this shelf, and parts of a pig on the top. And then we've got spanners. We've got a horse on wheels, missing ears there, and Christine the China doll. Then he's got his cup and biscuit. Again, if the photos had been printed at a better resolution, you'd be able to see this. Then we've got the title page, the tin mug, which is kind of the symbol for this story. Then we've got Mr. Trushenko's shop front. And I wrote all of these words. It actually took a really long time writing the words for the stories, because each of them has a different font. For instance, this is like a childlike font. I did it in a dark colour pencil because I wanted a pencil colour, even though the pencil graphite kind of doesn't really show up. But each book has a different font, which is not computer generated, but something that I wrote, and took quite a really long time. This is probably the most childlike, Inside the Night the Moon Went Out, but this is reasonably ornate. And there's a little open sign on his shop. Then we have all the different toys Mr. Trushenko makes. Now, some of these really are doll's house toys that I bought. For instance, this rocking horse, and some of these here, like this little wooden game, these wooden blocks, the dartboard, and the train, and little railway tracks, and the soldiers. But the rest of these things are from the Up in the Nursery series. So I made these two clowns, the giraffe, the little pig, this tiny duck, which I called Chick for some unknown reason. And all of these toys are in the video about the first batch of miniatures I made, which I called Up in the Nursery. That is actually a soft toy on wheels that I didn't make, and I bought from the most amazing doll's house shop called Kristin Baybar's, which is in Gospel Oak in North London. I didn't make that Humpty either. I think that's from Kristin Baybar's. But all the little dolls I made, and the tiny cardboard castle dragon, and there's Pootle, a little pixie on the step. This whole story, Mr. Trushenko the Toy Maker, actually came about because I simply had so many toys, 1/12 scale toys, i.e. toys for 1/12 scale figures, and I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a toy shop? And so that's how it all came about. And now it's one of my favourite stories. So here are some more of the toys that I made on shelves. And because I didn't really have enough shelves, and I didn't really have many proper things for a shop, I enlisted the old dresser I've had for since I was about 10 or 12, the Doll's House dresser, from one part of the shop. There's some views through the 2 bay windows. Some of these toys are bought. That is actually a 1/12 scale baby doll, which is exquisite, and that doll is the same. Is also bought, I mean, and there's a little porcelain doll, little jointed doll. But mostly they're things I've made. And then here are a few of the little people who are supposed to be customers peering in through the window of the shop. And here is a better view of the front of the shop, and some more of my little figures who are various customers leaving the shop. Various customers inside the shop. You get a little view of the inside of the shop. They're very homely, almost like a kitchen. Well, it was the kitchen of a little Tudor house for another story. And there's the front of the shop again. Pinocchio, Father Christmas, the lovely stag again that the lady from the American lady made. Mr. Tushenko's cross nature coming out. I think I photoshopped his cross eyebrows in later. On each page I wanted little pictures of some of the toys. This is the little baby doll, the jointed doll I made, and one of the little elephants. Here's a little close-up of things on the counter. So jars of sweets, sticks of rock. The sweets, by the way, are grains of rice wrapped up in red shiny paper, and there are little sugar mice with almonds, what are meant to be almonds stuck in, and sugar hedgehogs. The almonds are the prickles. And there's an outside scene with some more of the little people and Mr. Tushenko. That's the little Tudor house I had made from the other side. And here's a close-up of Mr. Tushenko's, tea, or dinner as English people call it. I made most of the food, well, all of the food. The china's bought, the pictures and accessories are bought. And this is actually the same room again that I used as the shop, but transformed into his living quarters. That's the same window here, and a till counter is placed here. And this is his workshop in the back. And there's the same dresser that all the toys were on, but this time filled with more conventional things. And this is supposed to be Mr. Tushenko in the moonlit toy shop, and it's empty. It's a close-up of his workshop through the door, and there's the picture from the back of the book where he's happily, for once, at work, tenderly, gently mending and making toys. That's the horse on wheels again, with his head broken off. I think his head really had broken off. I didn't break it just for that picture. There's another customer in Mr. Tushenko's shop. And then here comes the second main character in this book. It's actually Jim. Jim, the little boy from the 1930s. And I made a little coat, a raggedy kind of tweed coat for him to make him look like a beggar boy. And I can't remember if I made a different facial expression with vinyl. Yes, I think I did. So I covered over his grin with some other modelling clay, because I couldn't have him grinning through the whole story. There's some more shots of customers and him begging outside the shop in the snow this time. Then Mr. Tushenko is telling him to go away. Mr. Tushenko's mouth here, you notice, is not quite successfully done. It's Fimo, and I sculpted lips for him. But because I didn't want to bake the Fimo onto the face, because then his face would be permanently changed, I had to leave it unbaked, and you can see that the colour of the clay doesn't quite match his skin. I could have photoshopped that after if I thought. You can also see in this shot that the bay windows in fact don't open onto the shop but a brick wall. I was able to camouflage that in some of the other photos, but not here. And I don't know what that is. Oh, it's a piece of paper. And then this is my favourite photograph of the whole story. I like the angle, and I like the drama that's kind of encapsulated in it. I love the fact I managed to get tears on Jim's face, the little beggar boy's face, which were actually tiny bobbles of glue. And I love the little mouth I managed to make for him, which is yet another kind of addition with Fimo to his face. And I think I photoshopped in sad or frightened eyebrows afterwards. Then we have Mr. Trushenko in bed that night. I made him a nightcap and kind of night shirt, and made all the bedding for a 4-poster bed. And then we have him getting up in the middle of the night and wrapping up the bear that the little beggar boy was gazing at from the window because he feels guilty. This room is the upstairs of the Tudor house, and I made all of the bedding here. Bought the furniture. I always buy the furniture. I can't make wooden things, unfortunately. And now we have another snow scene, and all the villages. I thought I'd pop in the sailor, the drunk sailor there. The village green. And now we have a room in what is supposed to be a hospital, or for homeless children, kind of like a workhouse / hospital. And we've got Jim looking a bit worse for wear, fast asleep. I made a little sleeping face for him. He really has a delightful little face. And there's Mr. Trushenko. And now we have some photoshopped snow over the faces of the amazed villagers as they watch Mr. Trushenko carry home the beggar boy, because he decides to look after him, because he feels responsible for the beggar boy, for scaring the beggar boy, and for him falling and getting ill. I put little lamps inside the houses for the glow, and photoshopped out the background of whatever was here, probably a bit of my bedroom. And then we have Mr. Trushenko taking care of the beggar boy, Jim, and Jim looking a bit feverish, and then managing to take some porridge, and Mr. Trushenko staying up at night to look after him, and then being so tired he falls asleep himself. And the wonderful day in the spring when the beggar boy is well enough to is on the mend, and Mr. Trushenko gives him the longed for teddy bear that he used to gaze at in the shop window. And then we have a tiny shot of the village. This is actually a lovely little photo, although it's too tiny to see here. Kind of like a village green, and the various, the only 3 houses I could use that were relevant actually, but that I kind of modified to make it look like a street. So on the end we have the Tudor house, which was Mr. Trushenko's toy shop. We have this little house which reappears in the story about the old lady and the bear, which I haven't got to yet, called Little Old Lady Pie. And then the end of Mr. Trushenko's house, I propped up front facing us here to make it look like another building, but in fact it's just the end of this house. And then we have all of the villagers crowding around Mr. Trushenko, who's adopted the little beggar boy and has turned over a new leaf, and everyone finally likes him. Then we have the two lonely characters having found one another, enjoying life together, toasting bread by the fire. This was actually a really difficult shot to get because I wanted the firelight on their faces, but I couldn't get the camera in the same place as the light source. Things like that were a bit of a headache. Then we've got a nice sunlit shot of the inside of the shop. I really like this as well. I think often my favourite photographs or illustrations are because I've managed to achieve the light effect I wanted. On this occasion, it's a sunny, late after summer afternoon, and there's a lamp placed very, very close to this little window, which is giving off the light. And we have a closing shot, Mr. Trushenko and the little beggar boy. The front of the shop again, the beggar boy playing with the village children, and them keeping house together. The colour of that photograph and the resolution is not great. Then we have a little bedroom scene of Mr. Trushenko reading the little beggar boy a bedtime story, and I put the beggar boy, or Jim's, head on another little model for this who's about the same height. I called him Michael, and I talked about him in the video to do with the little people, and Michael was wearing a kind of all-in-one baby pyjama suit, which now Jim is wearing. And then the shop sign says closed because it's the end of the story. So there is possibly my longest and most involved story, Mr. Trushenko the Toy Maker. Now, the fifth mock-up book I wanted to show you is called Little Old Lady Pie. Again, I chose the font and drew the letters myself. The image is of a real tiny pie I baked and stuck through with little legs and shoes that I'd either made or bought. I bought those green shoes. There's the end, the bookend. Is that a bookend? No, it's not a bookend. What's that? The spine of the book. And on the back there's the same image this time. Then the end paper this time is the same as the cover, a pie with various legs and feet protruding, all supposedly belonging to old ladies. And oh right, I did the same end paper there. That should extend to this the back cover as well. This is probably the simplest story. Then we've got the title page and a little close-up of the little old lady's cottage, which I really, really, really love. Oh, to find a cottage like that in real life. Anyway, so we have our character who is a little old lady and is one of the little people, and in this story she's called Clara. I had the little house built by the same person who made all of the other houses. He did an amazing job for not that much money, and we worked really closely together, mainly by me emailing lots of really detailed plans and instructions. I planned all of the houses, and thankfully, although I hadn't made any doll's house plans before, he was able to use them. I'll put a link below to his website. He and his wife, as you can see, make the most lovely houses and are able to follow instructions very carefully. And I made the set. This is fake grass and lots of little trees my mum and I found, or sometimes fake trees. And the props are bought, like the all of the tiny accessories, unless they're food, are usually bought. So the fencing, the axes, the axe, the chopping block, the barrel, the spade. Then we have some small images of Clara working hard on her own, inside the house and outside it. I made these little vegetables to look like they're popping through the soil. And there's a close-up shot of her in the evening, and a very small shot of some little mice playing with a little bit of spilt meal or corn, and actually some cheese in a mouse trap, which is not doing much good. This is again one of those instances where I had great difficulty getting the light source where I needed it to be. I really wanted Clara to be, and the room to be lit by firelight coming from this fire here, but in order to get light from the fire, I would have had to board through the wall of the doll's house and shone a lamp in to get enough light. I already had a little battery operated moulded couple of logs here and coals, but the light they gave didn't even show up on a photograph, so I had to light the photo from the front and just hope that people don't really think about the light source and take instead the kind of general atmosphere of firelight away. And we have a cave that I made from chicken wire stretched over, well, made into a kind of frame and then doused and packed with infinite quantities of polyfiller. My mum and I went through so many bags of polyfiller. I was going to say cauliflower. It looked a bit like cauliflower, and it worked. The chicken wire and polyfiller made very, very strong structures which I could mould. So for instance, the inside walls of the cave really did look like stone, and also it made very realistic looking tree bark, which I'll show you in another book. This is a very unsuccessful fire and a cauldron I made. The fire, the flames are just fabric, didn't work, and the picture is really low resolution, so you can't see that in the back there's a jumble of little old ladies in a net, various ones of the little people, which were old ladies in some sort of net. I made all of this pastry and pies and baking things, and the bears, which you can see much better in some of the other photographs, or rather the bear I should say, but I had 3 bears made. I modelled myself and then sent to someone to be covered with fur. Now here Clara is lying in her bedroom at night, feeling afraid of the bear who lives in the woods beside her house, and this is a paper cutout shape that I placed behind a piece of fabric and then a lamp behind that to make it look as though the shape. As I was saying, so this cardboard cutout bear shape and lamp backlighting is meant to suggest the shadow of the bear in trees outside Clara's window. Then we have the bear cave, which is the structure I was saying that I made from chicken wire, which is like very, very strong wire in a mesh, so it's great for creating 3D structures, and polyfiller, and then I just painted it. This stairs leads nowhere, but it's meant to suggest the stairs up to the outside of the cave, and this tunnel doesn't lead anywhere as well. In fact, the wall would be visible unless I painted it dark like that. And there's the bear's bedroom. Again, the same old problem. I couldn't get a firelight coming from the fireplace, so I just had to put lamps in different places and hope that it wasn't really obvious. Now here's my bear that I sculpted and then someone covered in fur. He's probably about 8 inches tall, so about 7 foot in terms of the size of the little people, so taller than even the tallest man. And I photoshopped his mouth to be miserable afterwards because, of course, I didn't want the person who covered him with fur to make him have a permanent miserable expression. I love this little food cupboard, this little sort of pantry area, so I just photographed that there. And here is a clearing in the forest. These are mostly real trees or bits of real trees. A few stones, pebbles and artificial grass, which was incredibly expensive, I might add. I used the same bit of artificial grass for lots of the stories. For instance, the scrapwork field, Grandma's piano, the green in Mr. Trushenko, the toy maker, the night that the moon went out, Greta the Great. And I guess I got my money's worth, but it really was only about as big as a bedspread, and I think it cost about £80. So then we have the bear. This is how the face actually did look when the lady had finished covering it with fur. I was so happy with the result. She did a wonderful job. And I was also quite pleased with the sculpture of the bears I made beneath, or the armature, the clay figure beneath the fur. And they each have claws and they're jointed. They're very heavy actually. And this is again a different head that I put on Clara here for a surprised look. And then Clara and the bear stare at each other and try and make each other out, because it turns out they've both been afraid of each other this whole time. This arm was photoshopped to look like it was bending there, because actually his arms were straight like this and solid fine mill. Then there's a big spread of them both looking across at each other, and also kind of the turning point of the story. And then one begins to chuckle, and so does the other. Again, a photoshopped expression on the bear, and his arm, I think, maybe stuck at that angle on his body, because it didn't really bend that way. And then they get to know each other, shake hands, and the bear takes Clara's firewood. She takes his bucket that he was using to collect berries, and they go and have a cup of tea in Clara's house. You can see how much bigger the bear is than Clara here. And there they are at her front door, saying goodbye to us. So that's Little Old Lady Pie. Then the sixth little mock-up book I have to show you is called Grandma's Piano. This was a story I wrote very early on as well, probably in my early 20s, and got quite a lot of help with this and feedback. One of the earliest readers of my stories was Mark Haddon, who's the author of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. As most, or actually maybe a lot of you might not know, he began his writing career by writing texts for children's picture books and children's chapter books, and I got to know him because he was the husband of one of my tutors at university, and he's a very kind man and helped me a lot to kind of hone the technique needed for writing picture book texts, which is quite different from writing other types of books. Grandma's Piano was again initially intended to be illustrated in a very realistic way, but I found a little model who is in fact the older sister of Jim. She's a little girl meant to be from the 1930s, hence the kind of hairstyle with the clip on the side, but that I transformed by means of doll's house clothes into a little girl who lives round about now. And this old lady is actually, I initially made her with a nightgown. She was, but then I here she's wearing the body of Mrs. Egerton Warburton, the posh lady with the hat and the lorgnettes. The wonderful thing, and quite an exciting discovery I made with the models in the process of using them to illustrate these books, was that I could swap around lots of the bodies and heads and instantly have a new outfit for a character. That was wonderful when I realised I could do that. Now, the room in this picture is a room in a house I had made, and the only house that looks truly contemporary. It was the same house that was used I used in The Night the Moon Went Out. It's the house Joe and Grandad live in, and I love the house very, very much, and the garden, which you see a little bit in The Night the Moon Went Out, but not as clearly as you do in this book, in Grandma's Piano. So that's the living room, and on the back of the book is the living room again, but looking this time through the door to the hallway. And there's Grandma and Alice, is the little girl's name in this book, playing the piano. I bought a piano, a 1/12 scale piano, or rather a kit, specifically for this story, and painted it black to emulate the piano I myself had when I was a child, and had been my mum's when she was a child, and was a very old, dilapidated black upright piano. And the end paper this time is piano keys. I can't remember how I got this image. I think I got it online and replicated it by means of Photoshop. So the end papers are piano keys. Then we've got my little copyright page, the title page, and a close-up of Alice and Grandma's hands playing the piano together, which you'll see is a key motif and part of the story. Also this time I decided to use the effect of placing the illustrations in what I hope appears to be a photo album type style, so that each illustration is supposed to be a photograph placed into little paper holders in a photograph album. This effect was built into the software I used to create my website, and which also came in very useful when creating the illustrations for these books. A piece of software called iWeb, which used to come built into Apple Macs and is now obsolete. I don't know why they made it obsolete, because it was brilliant. You didn't need to know how to use any code or hardly any Photoshop, and you could get some wonderful effects with it by just dragging and dropping things. In any case, I still have my iWeb on one of my laptops, and it's not transferable to any other machine, and I have to keep the laptop simply for iWeb, but it's worth it. So Grandma's Piano is the only story that actually has typed text, but I thought it suited the story best. This is the kitchen of the modern house, and Alice and her younger brother and mum. This is the conservatory of the modern house. In the winter time, it's a cotton wool snowman with little pieces of real coal, actually, a little Fimo carrot nose and a cap. And here's Alice in winter clothes, and her baby brother and Grandma in dressed in, well, not dressed, but this is the body of another model, actually. I think it's Mrs. Pugh. And the warmly lit sitting room behind them, and the light streaming out. I was particularly happy with how I managed to put a lamp in the hallway and have the light stream out across the snow. Then we have Alice and Grandma in the bedroom. And again, I like the light coming from the big window here in Grandma's bedroom, which is one of the rooms upstairs in the modern house. Light from the landing streaming in. This is where Grandma is sick and not very well, and Alice is worried. This is Alice and her baby brother. They share a room together. This is another room in the modern house, in fact the one in the eaves of the kind of extension part which juts out the front. You'll see it in a later photograph. Then there's the sitting room, which is the main room used in this story, Alice, Grandma and the baby. Grandma playing the piano. Grandma and Alice playing the piano. And quite a difficult little shot because I had to position the camera smack bang above the piano in order to kind of get an aerial view of them both playing together, or rather Grandma playing and Alice snuggled up to her. And I wanted it to, I obviously needed the piano to be in the same position as it was before, which is against the sitting room wall, but I couldn't quite because I had to get the camera in. So this is angled slightly differently, but hopefully no one will notice that. Again, this is just lamplight, but it looks like sunlight simply because of the type of bulb, which is actually just a normal lamp bulb I had. And then there's a sequence of little illustrations of Alice dancing in different outfits to suggest different occasions to various types of music that Grandma plays on the piano. And hopefully the illustrations look like photographs in an album. There's Alice and Grandma playing to get the piano together on summer evenings. Then there's Grandma's room with the bed empty after she dies. There was some talk when I was writing this story about whether it was appropriate to talk about death in a picture book, but I'm glad I decided to go with it. And I think now there are quite a few picture books that deal with death. So now we have Alice missing Grandma. This little cat, by the way, I don't know where I found it, but it was such a wonderful accessory to lots of the illustrations because it was infinitely posable. It was just pipe cleaners. And here it's playing with a feather. I don't know if you can see that. This little white thing, it really is a feather. And then we have Alice getting kind of possessive of the piano, not wanting her little brother to play. Dad trying to arbitrate because Alice associates the piano only with Grandma. Then we have Alice remembering various things she and Grandma did. This is the kitchen of the modern house again. The sitting room of the modern house. This is just a backdrop of paper. It actually looks a bit like it. And Alice and Grandma. Grandma this time has Julia's body, the glamorous 30s lady. And Alice has Goldilocks' body. And then they're in the stream, or well, very tiny river, which actually appeared in the scrapbook field as well. The banks of the river worked out so well. In fact, I think it's just crumpled polystyrene painted brown with a few little bits of soil and sawdust. And the water was gauze or net, pale blue and white gauze and net, just kind of crumpled up. But thank goodness it managed to look like water. And there's my fake grass again. And this is the pretty fir tree branch that my mum found and that appeared in the night the moon went out, silhouetted against the moon. This is supposed to be a moonlit shot of Alice asleep in her bed in the middle of the night. Then a sequence of photographs in which Alice wakes up and follows music that she hears down to the sitting room, and she opens the sitting room door, and there, ghostly and beautiful at the piano, is Grandma. Moonlight's always a bit tricky. Daylight is quite easy because often lamplight looks like daylight in photographs, but moonlight requires usually a blue or white bulb, and even then some considerable photoshopping. So here's Grandma, this time with the body of a lady I think I called Lavinia, who I modelled to play the piano. And Alice rushes up to her and hugs her. And then in Alice's dream, she herself begins to play the piano, something she never wanted to do after Grandma died. and then she wakes up in her own bed. Again, quite a few different heads were used for Alice throughout the sequence of this book, although I managed to get away with Grandma just having the one head. Then we have Alice the next morning, who says yes to piano lessons when Mum suggests it. And now we have her having piano lessons with one of the little people who really wasn't ideal, but for some reason I decided I couldn't find a more suitable character at the time. He actually looks a bit creepy, but that's why I put Mum in the background. Mum is there in the piano lesson too. And this room is from another house, a kind of 1930s house, and it's actually a different piano. And then we have Alice, a little bit older, so I used her head on the body of an older model, a teenage kind of model, finding some sheet music in the attic. And I also have her little brother's head put on the body of a larger model, actually little Pixie's body here, to suggest he's grown up and about 3 or 4 years have passed. And then we have Alice playing the very same piece of music that Grandma used to play to her. And the loss of Grandma is encompassed, hopefully, seamlessly and contentedly into the present. And we have a picture once again of Alice and Grandma playing together, because when Alice plays the piece of music Grandma used to play, to her it feels as though Grandma is with her, sitting beside her all over again. So that's Grandma's piano. Now the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th little book I have to show you is called When the Lights Went Out. This story I worked on for many years, and I don't know where I got the idea for it from. This is actually, as you can see, real font. It wasn't drawn, and this is also a certain sort of font. I did this a dark green, fir green, to go with the painted door of the house, and I made the spine of the book dark green as well. And the back of the book is supposed to be the back of the house. In fact, it is the back of the doll's house. And this doll's house was made by the same brilliant couple. I'll put a link down below, that made the other houses for me. And it was meant to be a typical brick British terraced house, not changed since the 30s. And that's an important part of the story, because Alice goes to spend the day with Great Aunt Rose, who's quite elderly and has lived in the same way for many years. So she doesn't have lots of technology or all mod cons. And Alice is essentially emerged. So I can't remember quite what I was saying. Sorry about that. Before my battery ran out. Oh yes, I think I was saying that the fact that this house is pretty old-fashioned, like Great Aunt Rose, plays an important part in the story. So the end papers are oil lamps. This is a real 1/12 scale. No, actually it's not. I think it's an image from online. Anyway, oil lamps. Oh, there should be an end page there, but there isn't at the end of the book. Then we have, again, my felt tip pen written, felt tip pen this time, writing, some type, and then I think crayon. I use lilac crayons or lilac felt tip pens for the Grace and Clean. Then there's a close-up of Alice looking through a rainy window. In this case, the little model that I used for the story was the older sister of the little girl that I used in Grandma's piano, and the older sister of Jim, who was the little beggar boy in Mr. Trushenko the Toy Maker. I literally drenched the front of this doll's house, as you can see here, by spraying it with a plant spray. I couldn't think of how else to suggest it was wet and to get the film of water droplets on the plastic windows, but I I think you can see the water droplets there, and behind is the lit front room of Great Aunt Rose. There's another shot here, and I literally waited for a cloudy, rainy day to shoot this story. Sounds very important, to shoot, as if I'm some sort of film director, but honestly, the things I had to think of when photographing these children's stories, it became so convoluted, so complex, and it was a bit like filming, shooting a film. I could, give you an idea of the work involved in each scene, I could only shoot one scene a day, so I could only make and photograph one room or one scene, basically. So yeah, anyway, so it took many months, to about 6, I think, 6 to photograph the 9 stories. This time I wanted old-fashioned type as my font, and although I drew it because I wanted a kind of idiosyncratic handwritten style, I copied old-fashioned typewriter font. So I'm sorry, Lucy, it's not Alice. Lucy goes to stay with Great Aunt Rose for the day. This is the sitting room of the 1930s red brick terraced house, which I decorated purposefully in the colours and design of a 1930s or 40s house, just kind of pre-Second World War, possibly Second World War. I got this brilliant old plug-in heater in kit form from a place that did, I think, cast iron 1/12 scale kits, and there's a drop leaf table there, and the old photographs have chains on them, and I can't remember where I got this brilliant 3-piece suite. Oh yes, I think in Kristen Baybar's. It was reduced because no one wanted it, but it was perfect for what I needed. There's even old light switches on the wall. Can't remember where I got those. I think also Kristen Baybar's. So as you can see, also Great Aunt Rose is Maria, the German or Swiss lady, little model that I made. I thought she best fitted the bill for Great Aunt Rose. So lots of close-up interior shots in this story. Then Great Aunt Rose, I quite like the layout of this page. We have Lucy in the hall, and again I had multiple heads for this little figure because she has a range of expressions, and Great Aunt Rose in the kitchen sitting room, and the divide of the page representing the divide between the 2 characters. Then I absolutely, oh sorry, and again I decorated the kitchen and living room as best I could in a kind of wartime style. So this piece of furniture from the back was again a kit that I bought from someone who specialised in 1/12 scale kits of this type. And the wallpaper in the hall is pretty, and the colour of the paint around the door I all considered quite carefully. Then I really, really love the little back garden of Great Aunt Rose. This little outhouse with a privy and coal shed was beautifully made by the man who made the doll's house. And this little vegetable patch, the vegetables are actually the same as Clara's vegetables in Little Old Lady Pie. Again, we've got the raindrops on the window and a barrel with real water in it, and I love that. Then we've got an aerial shot because there's a wall here and I couldn't really photograph where I wanted, so I had to look down, but it turns out it's quite nice for a different sort of angle. And that was actually a challenge in this story, to find sufficiently interesting angles for the pictures, because they're all relatively mundane kind of interior shots, because the story is meant to be about a boring day. This is actually the mantelpiece. You can see the spaniel here and a photo frame. Then again, I needed firelight to light up the characters' faces. This time I managed to do it by putting a lamp where the fireplace would be if the wall was here. In fact, in this house there were 2 walls that I could slide away, which was an ingenious solution which I came up with, so that I can photograph from lots more angles, and that really, really helped. So Again, real rainy daylight coming through the doll's house window. Light isn't affected by scale, so you can wait for the perfect weather and then just photograph that perfect weather for the story coming in through the tiny windows. Again, old-fashioned radiator, stairs. And then this bathroom is actually from the modern house, the house that featured in The Night the Moon Went Out and Grandma's Piano. And I made the bathroom suite because I simply couldn't find bathroom furniture in a modern style. So I bought the taps and handrails and things like that. Then I made the bath. I can't quite remember how I did it, but there's a section in the website on my website on how I made this. And this is just I think this is real foam, real like bubbles from fairy liquid that I filled the bath up with. The inside of the bath is made with quick drying clay. I think it might be paper clay, painted white. I bought tile sheets for the walls, same quick drying clay to make the wash hand basin. And Great Aunt Rose is treading the washing in the bath here, in case you're wondering what she's doing, which I remember my mum doing when I was a child, simply because for a lot of the time we didn't have a washing machine. And then Lucy gets in and helps. Photographing these models, I had to make feet specially for them, legs and feet, and remove their existing legs and feet. And then I had to blue tack the limbs in place because they simply wouldn't stay in place. That was a bit of a job. And then as the rain comes down heavier and the house becomes darker, because the whole premise of the story is the electricity goes off. We've got one oil light, really an electric little bulb in this oil lamp, lighting the whole room, and Lucy and Great Aunt Rose using the mangle, which again I remember helping my mum to do because we didn't have a washing machine. Then they're preparing peas, and again the image does suffer a little bit because of the low light, at least in this poor resolution here. They're preparing peas for lunch and then eating lunch by candlelight. The real digital image is actually very atmospheric, but because of the poor reproduction here, it's quite fuzzy. And then we have them enjoying homemade lemonade they've just made, and toffee, which Great Aunt Rose has shown Lucy how to do. And by this time, Lucy is quite enjoying herself. Then they toast bread by the fire, and I was so happy with this photo because again I used a lamp where the fireplace is to give the illusion of firelight and managed to get shadows on the wall behind them. And at the same time I'd waited till evening time when real twilight was coming through my bedroom windows and lighting up the raindrops on the window pane on the front of the doll's house, real water drops from the plant spray with a kind of inky twilight light. Now, I don't know if you can make it out, but I, after much experimentation, managed to get the models' hands to make shadows on the wall. And here they're doing a shadow show by firelight again. And then, again, I really love the effect of the firelight on the raindrops on the window, or lamplight on the water mist on the windows of the doll's house here, as Mum arrives. And Lucy discovers she actually has enjoyed the day with Great Aunt Rose, and she actually likes Great Aunt Rose as well, which she didn't to begin with. And here she is giving Great Aunt Rose a hug goodbye. So that is the 7th mock-up picture book. Now the 8th and penultimate mock-up picture book is called Where's My Story? And as I mentioned at the outset of this very long video, unless I chop it up into bits, this was the first story I wrote because I'd had the idea of using the little people as models, or as photographing them for illustrations. And I explain how I came about that. I explain how I got the idea for this story, because a lot of the little people I've made are from fairy tales or nursery rhymes, and Little Pixie, who is just a kind of generic little pixie whose face was perfect and lent itself to so many different expressions, is sad because he doesn't have a story, and he wanders through everyone else's story until he realizes he's actually been walking through his very own book. So a bit meta, but not too convoluted that quite young children would enjoy it, I think. I wanted the cover to be very simple, with blue, red and white as the main colours. There's the spine. I really like the way the letters turned out, my felt tip letters this time. I like the simplicity of it. And here's Little Pixie supposedly posing this question. Now, the end pieces in this book are a stage, or the curtains for a stage my mum and I made with scraps of material, and I think turned out really, really beautifully. I don't know where we got this tassel from. In fact, the relevance of this curtain and the stage is not immediately apparent, and I sometimes think I should have had something else for the end pieces. For instance, say Little Pixie's knapsack repeated as a kind of wallpaper. In any case, I went with this. And here is Puss in Boots, the little pipe cleaner cat that I bought for, I can't remember why I bought it now, dressed up with a little hat, posing as Puss in Boots, hogging the limelight here, and a sheep. You'll understand why there's a sheep at the end. I seem to have given myself, or the reader, except these little books haven't had any readers, except my agent, and, well, and some editors, children's editors, but for one reason or another they didn't like them. I think the most commonly given reason was that the stories were too old-fashioned, but well, that might be true, but I think illustrated in this way they would appeal to parents and children. At least they would definitely appeal to me. Yes, so as I was saying before I had the phone call, sorry about that, I've given myself a little kind of extra end page in which I feature all the covers of the books, and then the matching end page to the front, to the image inside the front cover of the stage, is the parted curtains of the stage and all the cast of characters that appear in this little book, along with some beautiful little, what are they called, screens? Yes, or set pieces of scenery that my mum painted specifically for this little stage, which is just really, I think it's a shoebox or something. And there's Little Pixie in the middle of the cast of characters. I can't remember what this gold is, but it's kind of a border for the stage. And then I strew the stage with little 1/12 scale roses, because the play or the book has been a success and people are throwing flowers at them. So the story begins with Little Pixie reading, surrounded by a pile of 1/12 scale storybooks, which I bought in Kristen Bay Bars, I think. Look, there's even a Ladybird book there. And another Ladybird book, I think. Wonderful. So then we have an array of characters. Puss in Boots, the egg and the spoon. I made these. They're not very good. It's a little 1/12 scale plate with legs and arms and a spoon I made with Fimo. And then I drew that face on a grandfather clock, and there's a little mouse running up it. And there's the old lady who didn't open the pantry to feed her dog, to give her dog a bone, but the pantry was bare, so the poor dog had none. This is a little pipe cleaner dog I got in Kristen Bay Bars for like £6 or £7, which was brilliant. and there's little Pixie asking why everyone has a story but him, and then he sets off to seek his story. Now, the background of these illustrations is meant to be the white of the paper, so purposely I've just drawn seagulls and suggested stones on the path and clouds in the sky. And I made this little signpost which says, points to the past, the future and nowhere. And this says somewhere in between. And I made this gate with lollipop sticks. I really was very pleased with that gate actually. And this is fake grass, and is it called sea moss, that kind of stuff they use on model railway sets. And little Pixie there has, I think he has the Traveller's or the Tramp's knapsack. And again, the image is supposed to be partly paper, sort of meta the paper of the book, and partly set. So this is actually Sylvie's cottage from the scrapbook field, and the same stone walls, and here's Goldilocks and the three bears, and one of the bears starred in Little Old Lady Pie. Here we have the old lady who lived in a shoe, and the sea is pegged out as if on a line with two little pegs, because she's got all the washing from her many children pegged on a line. Little Pixie's here at the fence. All the little children were the smallest models I'd made, little pixies and elves. The little old lady was the little old woman model I mentioned in the video about the little people, and the house my mum made brilliantly with plaster of Paris to look like a boot, and I had a little metal door and window, and I made a little wooden window box, and we put a cardboard roof on it, and I think a straw for a crooked chimney, and there's the shoe house that the old lady lives in. Now here is Dr. Gloucester up to his waist in a puddle, up to his middle in a puddle. Not very successful cobblestones, but we tried, or rather I tried, sinking pebbles halfway in clay, and I can't quite remember why it didn't work, but it didn't. So in the end, in despair, I just kind of strew the ground with pebbles. This is a mirror dotted or rather sprayed with water to denote a puddle, and these walls here are parts of the Tudor house that appeared in Mr. Treshenko, the toy maker, rearranged to look like walls of buildings in a town. And oops, I'm losing pages. And this model here is a doctor, and I literally cut his body in half. Sorry, doctor, to make it appear like he had stepped in a puddle up to his middle. Now this is the Emperor's New Clothes, a very simple set with wallpaper and tiled flooring, and I made this naked So I made a naked body for Tsar Nikolai the Terrible, and bought a mirror here, a 1/12 scale mirror, and then I photoshopped a front view of Tsar Nikolai the Terrible fully clothed into the mirror in order to suggest that to the Emperor he was dressed in the most beautiful clothes, whereas from the back, whereas to everyone else, he is a laughable figure in the nude. I managed to make a lot of my little people work for this. All sorts of time periods and dresses and costumes I thought didn't really matter. It was a nice Catholic mixture. Then we have the 7 dwarves, which came in very handy, my little people that I've made purposely as 7 dwarfs, and I thought they could figure easily in this story because it's a very well-known fairy tale, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Then Bo Peep, the same again. The only thing I had to make were the sheep, which were I made Fimo heads and bodies without legs. Legs are sort of irrelevant when you're photographing them in grass like this, and then put fleece around them. They were surprisingly easy to make actually, and these are fake fir trees. Then Rip Van Winkle, is that the fairy tale? Rumpelstiltskin, I'm sorry, yeah, Rumpelstiltskin. I'd already made a Rumpelstiltskin, here he is. It just remained for me to buy a 1/12 scale spinning wheel and make a heap of straw, and also make lots of tiny spools of golden thread. This is the outside of Mr. Trushenko the toy maker's house again, and this is Wee Willie Winky. This picture didn't really work because I'm trying to suggest twilight, but it's not really believable, I don't think. And besides, Willie Winky's candle should be lit. Now we have Father Christmas and what I thought could be enlisted as an elf and a helper, and the stag again, now a reindeer, and a map I made Father Christmas to suggest he's lost, and baby bunting. I just made some bunting across the top, and I wrote his name on a cradle, and this little chap is called, I can't remember, I think I called him William, and he was the kind of baby that I was most proud of because every bit of him was perfect. And then we have Jack and the Beanstalk. This is a large Fimo boot at the top of a very twisty branch, which I painted green to suggest the beanstalk. And then I have a little figure, a little boy running away with a harp, which he's just stolen from the giant, over the shoulder. I had to buy the harp, that was too difficult to make. Then we've got the witch. She was actually suspended on a piece of invisible nylon thread, dangling behind little Pixie, who was running with the help of some blue tack, fixing him in place here, and a big sweep of curve of white paper behind them. And then we have a close-up of little Pixie, which I really like, and in the digital version of this video you'll be able to see the photo a lot more clearly. And he has a little glue teardrop on his cheek because the fact that he doesn't have a story is finally really getting him down. The letters again are fabric mostly in this book. There's tartan, blue and white check, stars for Father Christmas. Actually this is wrapping paper. I think I included paper or fabric, whichever seemed most suitable. This is the same blue stripe as Wee Willie Winky's outfit. This is golden thread spooled into an O shape for Rumpelstiltskin. I can't remember what the pale colour I used for Bo Peep hasn't really come out very well. Oh, I think I used for each of the 7 dwarves the same fabric as made part of their outfit. So for instance, or at least coordinated with their outfit. No, I think this was the same shirt fabric. It's just so much bigger. So this is the same sort of spring green and mustard check shirt fabric I've used. The orange corduroy, green. Okay, and here for instance, oh sorry if you can hear a TV in the background, Dave's just come home. So the letter here is, it's actually raindrops. I looked online for raindrops and I downloaded the image. I think it's raindrops on a windscreen or something. And I've already mentioned the pegs. And this is red because for once it's taken from Little Pixie's costume. This is the blue taken from his jumper. And so where were we? With Baby Bunting, Father Christmas, oh no, Little Pixie crying. Then my favourite fairy appears, the plump, I was going to say the fat fairy, the plump fairy, who looks a bit like my Auntie Anne. Sorry, Auntie Anne, but she is pretty. And she doesn't look like my Auntie Anne because she's plump. She looks like her because her face is similar and they have big eyes and a tiny nose. Anyway, so the fairy appears, then there's a noise which causes them to look up, and there's my hand. Yes, this was quite tricky to photograph. I think I had to hold, this is again a big swathe of white curving paper behind them, the fake fir tree, the models, and my hand, and with my other hand I was holding the camera. And then there's a little present under the fir tree, and the present turns out to be a book, which is this book. So I made the cover and photoshopped the image into that space. Photoshopped a grin on Little Pixie's face, and then I drew a door on a piece of paper, deliberately simple, and the door in the paper opens because then I literally cut around the door to make it open. There was a sort of bent L-shaped plane of paper with the door on the back plane of the piece of paper. I realised doing these videos that I'm extraordinarily bad at explaining things. I'm very bad at explaining things, right? Yes, and so the door in the paper wall opens and everyone is there. And the surprise is comprised of fabric from lots of their different outfits. The word surprise. And they surprised Little Pixie with, there's the missing page, by sitting down and listening as he reads this book, his own story to all of them. The fairy is suspended from a nylon thread. By the way, this is the baby bear of the three bears, and the other bear is there, but you can't see very well. Baby bear was so cute. It's a shame that he didn't get to feature in the picture books a little bit more. And so that is Little Pixie's first story. And then because I loved using him so much, and because he was such a star, I wrote a second little book featuring him. And you'll have to excuse the cover of this mock-up book. I badly misjudged the measurements. The second book featuring Little Pixie is called Little Pixie's Rainy Day. These were paper letters that I cut out. And the cover, though you can't really see, is actually Little Pixie. He's holding a bottle of milk. He's just come out of his front door. There's the bell, his bell. And he lives in a tree. And he's holding up his hand because he's feeling drops of rain. Inside we have raindrop end paper, and at the end I've got my selection of other children's picture books there. That was a bit ambitious and hopeful looking back because none of them were accepted for publication. And the end paper is Little Suns. So we go past the raindrops. We have a lovely little, I love this image. It's some of Little Pixie's belongings in a small box, because what happens is, in this story, is it rains so much that rain begins to fill up his treehouse, and he has to move his belongings up floor by floor. And this is just photoshopped to give it a kind of hazy edge. And then I love the way you can see the crayon pencils in Little Pixie's Rainy Day and Grace McLean. I really love the fact that showed up. And then here is Little Pixie's to-do list, which really was written in a 1/12 scale notebook. I think I've written, I can't see through the camera. It says, dusting? No, cupboards, windows, floors, rugs, china, cobwebs. I still can't work out what the first word is. The pencil, by the way, is a match sharpened to a point and coloured with a felt tip pen. It's not just sharpened, actually, it's beveled, so it has 6 or 8 sides. So we begin with the same, with fabric and paper letters again, and handwritten text. And this tree was made with the same chicken wire and polyfiller that the bear's cave was made with in Little Old Lady Pie. The tree is probably up to a man's shoulder. It's enormous and weighs a ton. It's a monster. My parents have it now, poor things, as they've just had to move recently. And the polyfiller is still just as strong. It's not broken at all. That's a little wooden door I put in the trunk, and it's simply painted then brown. These branches are meant to appear to be part of the tree, but in fact they're just superimposed because the tree is just a trunk. I wasn't able to make branches, and this is the forest floor with some puddles. Okay, so I'm back a bit later, having had dinner, and I was telling you about how I made the tree from chicken wire and polyfiller. And the back of the tree is as cut away, and there are 3 rooms as you look at it. The bottom room is the hallway, the second room is a sitting room, and the top room, sorry, there are 4 rooms. The third room is this kitchen room here, and the top room is Little Pixie's bedroom. I absolutely love this little room. It is such a humble affair, but it's just delightful. I just want to live in it. So there's just a little sink on bricks here, draining board, 1 shelf, Little Pixie's utensils and supplies, a little bag of flour or something, a stick broom, a cupboard with a few pots of jam. The windows were actually lattice work, but you can't really see because the resolution of the photos is so bad. You can just about see. I drew pen permanent marker lines on perspex, little curtains, and a real lantern, well, an oil lantern that is electric, hanging from the ceiling. Then we've got Little Pixie having his cornflakes and tea. Yes, I really love that kitchen. So the story begins with Little Pixie beginning to do his spring cleaning and making a list of jobs he has to do. He begins in his bedroom. This is the top room in the tree, and you can see that the walls are just plain polyfiller. I didn't paint them. They looked like they were whitewashed, and that was perfect. I lay doll's house floorboards on the floor. This is another lattice window down near the floor. This is Little Pixie's bed, which I made from a cast iron kit. And this spider web in the corner of the room is made from cotton. So Little Pixie just begins to clean when he hears the doorbell, and downstairs is an old lady. This is a cocktail umbrella painted black. I could not find 1/12 scale umbrellas anywhere, and I couldn't make them, so that was the best I could do. This is, I think it's fabric, this D here. So Little Pixie's grandma asks him if she can come in, and she's baked him some scones. So she comes into the hallway. This is the hall. So this here is the front door, the same door as this. we've got just meant to be a dirt floor this time, no floorboards, and a few coat hooks and a basket of coal and sticks, an umbrella stand, and Grandma's dog leaves footprints on the floor. I don't know if you can see that. And there are just little free floating steps going up, leading up into the sitting room. And above the sitting room is the kitchen again, where Grandma and little Pixie have the scones. Scones, I say, but scones, I guess they should be pronounced probably. Then the doorbell goes again, and downstairs we have Mrs. Warburton with this time a red painted cocktail umbrella, and the puddles outside are growing because it's raining even harder. She's caught in the rain and wants to take shelter, so little Pixie brings her in, and as she comes in she brings her shopping trolley and trails some groceries and tiny pieces of pasta with her. I managed to buy some, I think it's real pasta, incredibly enough. I think from Kristen Baybar's 112 scale pasta. So now there are paw prints, flour and pasta trailed across the whole floor. And now we can see the free floating stairs up which Mrs. Warburton is climbing, and little Pixie looking at the mess on his floor and on his kitchen floor. So now the three of them have tea. Then the doorbell goes again, and Mr. Hawthorne is down below. He says he can't get his car fixed and needs to come in and wait till the rain stops. And he leaves a mess all over little Pixie's kitchen sink of oily fingerprints. And then Alfred Witt is at the door with some vegetables as a gift for little Pixie, and he leaves mud everywhere. And we can see there little Pixie getting a bit distressed at the state his house is getting into, when in fact this was supposed to be his cleaning day. It's a fabric eye. It was getting crowded in the kitchen. And they move to the living room where little Pixie lights the fire. This is the first view of the living room. There's a fake door in the wall here. A triangular corner cupboard which I sank into the polyfiller so it was flush with the curve of the wall. A little fireplace, some chairs and a table. There wasn't really any more room for that. The rooms in the tree are quite small. The doorbell goes again, and Mother Cherry is down below, and she has rain is coming into her house, so she has to shelter in little Pixie's. And the cat oh yes, so Grandma's dog frightens Moppet, Mother Cherry's cat, and chaos ensues as the cat bounds across the table. By the way, this is real marmalade in a tiny glass jar, and real tea, real milky tea spilt all over the place. This story has a little bit of a farcical element because the chaos compounds and the situation just gets more and more absurd. The next person to ring the doorbell is Stan, Farmer Stan with his sheep. In fact, these were Bo Peep's sheep, and now the puddles are forming more of a lake outside. I think this was a piece of mirror I put down. So he needs to shelter, and there is nowhere for them to go except into the living room. So Stan comes into the living room and the sheep stay in the hall. And then the Wanderer comes along with his owl. Can't remember what I've called. Yes, I've called him the Wanderer. Moppet the cat springs at the owl, and even more mess and mayhem and madness ensue as the cat knocks over everything in her path. And then the hall begins to flood, and the sheep have to come into the living room. Here they are nose to nose with Watson, Grandma's dog. Now, my mum and I really did flood the treehouse in order to obtain this single photograph, which was taken frantically because in the process of flooding the treehouse, we managed to actually partially flood our house, or at least we managed to get water running down the kitchen downstairs. Hello. Dave has just come in and he's playing Howard Stern. Hang on a minute. Hang on. So, what my mum and I did was we got the chicken wire and made a kind of small swimming pool, and then put black tarpaulin inside this kind of trough. Oh, Dave is laughing at Howard Stern, not me. And then we filled it with many, many buckets of water until it was pretty much the size of a paddling pool. And then between us, we lifted this enormously heavy tree, including the base, because I'd sort of bolted the chicken wire tree to the wooden base in order to keep it standing up. So the base had to go in as well. But in the process of lowering this, it must have weighed about 4 or 5 stone at least, lowering it into the wire and tarpaulin trough, the bits of sharp chicken wire on the bottom of the wooden base of the tree punctured the paddling pool, punctured the pool of tarpaulin, and we didn't realise, but all our water was seeping out, and it went through the floor of the bathroom where we were doing it and ended up running down the walls of the kitchen downstairs. Now, we'd only managed to get the water up barely midway in the hall of the tree, and I flooded the tree knowing it might penetrate the polyfill walls and make it soft and even start to disintegrate. So even before we realised we were flooding our house, we knew we couldn't let the tree stay in the trough very long. But then when we realised it was, gallons of water were leaking all over the carpet and were going through the floor, we had to be doubly quick. In any case, I got my shot. You can see real water there and everything floating in it. Now, I tried obviously lots of other ways of getting this water effect. I tried cutting out a piece of perspex, I tried cellophane, and nothing looked real. I even thought about photoshopping in a kind of grey film later, but then I didn't know how to make everything float, and so in the end it was just easier to really make a pool of water. So everyone goes upstairs to the kitchen, and it's so crowded by this time that they're basically on top of one another, and little Pixie is quite downcast by this stage because he realises the spring cleaning will never get done. Not only is his house messier than it's been all year, it's so full of people he couldn't possibly start cleaning. Then through a series of small pictures, we follow the progress of the water rising outside. Here's a mirror and a duck on top of it, and this is the kitchen window. Then the sheep have to come up from the sitting room to the kitchen. Now a plastic goat is floating by on a wooden door, like a front door, past the kitchen window. Then the water reaches the kitchen, and if I remember rightly, yes, these are kind of these were the puddles outside that they're pieces of mirrored cardboard, and I managed to fit them around the figures and Photoshop in the tiny gaps later, and it looks as though the table is floating on the water and the water is halfway up everyone's legs. And then I moved the mirror pieces up even further, and now everyone, their heads are touching the ceiling. Someone rows by in a little boat, a gnome with a fox. That fox appeared in the story Greta the Great, and he rows by the kitchen window, and now the water is rising so high they have to move out of the kitchen. They move up to little Pixie's bedroom, and we have sheep upon sheep upon sheep, and then Watson and the owl at the top. I don't know where Moppet the cat has got to. She's around somewhere. And everyone is making a big commotion, and then Pixie hears something else, or rather he didn't, and it turns out he hears quietness because the rain has stopped. And then everyone stops talking, and everyone hears this quiet, and they peer out of the window, and the sunshine is coming in. Now this is a lamp, but this is meant to be sunshine streaming into little Pixie's bedroom, and everyone is overjoyed. Moppet and Watson are dancing together. Grandma and Mr. Hawthorne are hugging. Mother Cherry is dancing. Little Pixie is looking on rather bewilderedly. In fact, his face always looks a bit bewildered. And then, when everyone has gone home, he realizes, to his absolute surprise, that the rain has cleaned the whole of his house. Now, of course, this would never happen in reality, because after a flood, people's houses are pretty much ruined. But this is a children's story. I was reasonably pleased with the kind of reversal of fortunes at the end. So there we have little Pixie ticking off all the jobs he had to do, his spring cleaning jobs. And then, even though the sun is beaming outside, he's so tired from all the excitement and commotion that he falls asleep in his armchair with his duster. He says, "There's only one thing to do, which is to get down the big cobweb in my bedroom. I'll just do that, then I'll go out and enjoy the sunshine." And he doesn't ever get to. But there's the tree in the sun. That's about the most you ever see of the front of the tree. The kitchen window is just above that. But in the behind the scenes video I'll make, I'll show you the whole of the tree, the front and the back. And there you have the very last mock-up book, and the second in the Little Pixie series, Little Pixie's Rainy Day.